Oh my. Anyway, I'm going to turn it all over to Beverly and she'll tell you why she loves dessert so much. Okay, Beverly?
I think obsessed is the word.
Obsessed is the word. Yes. Well, thank you all for coming.
Well, thank you, Claudette, and thank you for the library for hosting this event. I mean, Claudette, it was your idea a year ago to do this, and you waited patiently for my torn meniscus to heal. So, thank you to my friends who helped hang the show. Without you guys, I could have never done that. And thank you to my daughter for providing desserts. Um, so food, we're here for food, glorious. Yeah, not if you eat the avocados. You know, you'll do okay. I don't think it goes up from looking, does it? um, okay, food. Food, glorious food, and non-diabetic food too. You know, food tells a story. It tells a story about our culture, our socioeconomic class, and often it's about our identities. We gather around food for meals. We have social interaction around food, celebrate, and we connect to our community. And we connect on a spiritual basis around food. Art centering around food does the same thing. It tells a story. What we see or eat is as important as what we don't eat. You know that phrase, you are what you eat? Well, you also are what you paint. And so, you know, I was wondering what, you know, that says about me. At the end, you can tell me after you're looking at these paintings. But today we're going to start with this painting. It's, um, it's a very striking Dutch 17th century still life. And when you talk to people about food and art, that's a lot of times what they start with. But I'm really here to talk about the story with this. This is like a moment of stillness in time where someone has chosen lobster and peeled lemons and fruit and wine to put it together. And what they're doing is they're celebrating the end of like liberation. So Protestant Holland was liberated from Catholic Spain, and they were so happy that they became prosperous, and they wanted to show it off by painting this kind of work. So there's a big story here, a sense of optimism. Um, you know, that you had the rise of the middle class, and all of a sudden there was this big demand for panel paintings, for portable easel paintings that they could show in their house and that they can show everybody else their status. Um, so what's striking about this are the colors, the red lobster, the blue taffeta, the color of royalty and spirituality and power. You have a peeling lemon. Both the lemon and the lobster were symbols of power because now you had this big major trading company and empire, and they could import all this from the New World because lemons weren't available in Holland at that time, and neither was lobster. So this is all just very, very symbolic. And it's just a very expensive setting. You see over on the left, like ebony and mother of pearl, and very delicate glass. It's all very curated. So think about how you would set the table if you were having someone over and you wanted to impress them. What would you serve them? Um, there was a time when I bought lobster too to impress people, but I didn't buy the whole lobster. I just did the tail. So anyway, the next painting, the next painting is quite a contrast. It's very busy. It's very lush. It has fruit on the top. It's got peaches in a bowl falling over and vegetables and gourds scattered on the bottom. It's on a table, looks like a picnic table. File that away for later because we're going to come back to it. I grew up with this painting in Detroit, and I was always mesmerized by the boar head and the dead deer waiting to be prepared and cooked. And this is something that is through art history. The part that I had to cut for this talk was all about the meat and the, like, Rembrandt painted a carcass, and all these artists went and painted. This was like, so I mean, even though we don't see that on our table, it's the way people would think about their food. It's a little bit chaotic. You know, you could almost think that it's a market scene, and maybe it is, but that isn't not what it's called. So contrast that with this, which is a very quiet still life. But what it does is it portrays something called a vanitas theme that was very prevalent in 17th century Dutch and Flemish art. And what you see, vanitas is the vanity of life. It's a warning about not getting too caught up in all the wealth and prosperity that's around, not getting caught up by material things. We see the passage of time. We see the ephemeral quality of life in the broken glass, the peeled lemon, the half-eaten pie there, and the overturned silver. You know, we're looking at the end of a meal, not the beginning, which is different than what we've seen previously. It's also still a prosperous painting. It's telling us about what's going on at the time, but it's more subdued. And the other thing that's interesting is when you look at this pie here, you see the crenellations on the crust. So there was a new invention at this time that changed the way people ate and had meat pies. You know, like today we do a shepherd's pie, but until this time, they didn't have a press to put crust in. And then all of a sudden that was developed, and it just changed the way people ate. This is almost like a shepherd's pie. It was very common in paintings. So the next one takes this vanitas symbol to a whole new level by putting a skull in it. And the skull is about the inevitability of death. You know, it's almost, you know, it just really goes one step further. And then there's a message on that paper, and it says, eternity is hinged upon this moment. Now, you know, we could analyze that all day, but it's really saying, I think, that don't worry about the future and all accumulating all this wealth, and don't worry about the past, just think about now. And then, but yet this is something that has wealth in it. That's a chest of jewels with pearls and flowers that are kind of dying. It's kind of like you're at the highlight. It's like the Roman Empire. I think about the Roman Empire was really, really wealthy, doing well, and then all of a sudden you have the fall of the Roman Empire. So this is almost anticipating that and reminding us that things are just temporary and that we're all going to die, which is a little morbid, but and there's some tension in that concept. So this is one of the most iconic still life paintings of all time. It's Caravaggio. And in person, it has it's a kind of a just very quiet presence to it. And it's interesting because this painting has its own Wikipedia page. And they do a whole analysis of all the fungus on this and the insects and the predators and everything that's on this. Like you see here, this is, it's eaten up, and you see the leaves are kind of disintegrating. And it just, it's another way of doing the vanitas. And Caravaggio was a Baroque artist, and he's the one that brought us biblical paintings of peasants in everyday clothes that were ripped and feet that were dirty. So it's not surprising that he did a still life that was really being decimated by bugs. But it was also a metaphor for the church and his feeling about organized religion, which was at war within itself. Has anybody ever seen this artist before? Yeah, he's in a class by himself. Archibaldo, and this is a picture of Vertumnus, and so that's a Roman god. And what this is a portrait of the Holy Roman Empire, emperor at the time, and it's done in food. And at the, in this period, you're into, the end of the 16th century, you had all these families, including the Medici in Italy. They would collect things. They would collect the cabinet of, they call it a cabinet of curiosities. And this fit right in, very curious, very unusual, and everything was chosen to portray power and wealth and prosperity. And one of the things that's kind of hidden in the ear is an ear of corn, and that was only available by trading with the New World at that point. So, no one really had an ear of corn. If you had an ear of corn, that said a lot about you to people. Now here's food. Food is spirituality, nourishing the soul. This has a lot of presence in person. I just saw it in California last year. And you just know that it's spiritual. You look at it, you feel it. There's quietness, there's an otherworldliness about it. And when you look at it in Catholicism, you have reference to, like, there's three parts in this painting. So the Holy Trinity, that's what's written quite a bit. Then the three parts. And then you have a goblet here with water. You have a stem with no thorns on it. And it references the Virgin Mary. And then you have blossoms that also does that with oranges. So it's about renewal of life. And in essence, this painting becomes an altarpiece. It's just, it's very profound, but very simple. It's Spanish. And I'm not going through the names because the names aren't that important. It's the concepts. So we're into the 18th century now, and think back to 17th century Dutch when you had that dead boar and deer there. So you still had paintings like this going on in France. And this is a statement about class, because if you were fairly well off, you could have meat. You had meat, you had root vegetables, eggs, cheese. But if you were a worker bee in that society, all you got was vegetables. That was your whole diet. Like, meat wasn't even available at that time. No wonder people didn't live that long. This is a painting. Did any of you see the cypress show at the Metropolitan Museum? So it was mostly cypresses, but there was one painting with food in it, and that was this. And it's by Van Gogh. And I'm always drawn to Van Gogh because I like the thickness of the paint that he uses. You see the texture, which I try and use. And again, even though he's just doing a secular painting, it's still lemons and oranges that he chose. And he was from Holland. So it's like it kind of seeps through the culture, the history just comes through. And here's Cezanne. He's also looking back at 17th century still life. He puts a skull in there. He had a lot of skulls in his studio. And I grew up in Detroit with him. He did 3 skulls, and that was like the centerpiece of the post-impressionist gallery. He just liked painting skulls. But within this context, again, it's the memento mori thought that, death is upon us, death is near, it's inevitable. And you see it here in this apple, and I think it's an apple, but it's half eaten. So everybody's they're looking back, looking forward, and their experience is similar through food. Oh, whoops. Gotta go back here. All right. This is a contemporary work. It's a quilt by Faith Reingold. And Faith Reingold is a storyteller and has been featured recently around at the Metropolitan Museum with Jacob Lawrence and other people that tell stories. And this is a fascinating quilt for many reasons. First of all, she appropriated Matisse's Harmony in Red. So she's appropriating a Matisse painting in there that has fruit in it. She has her own basket of fruit kind of updated for the culture she's trying to represent. But what makes this the most interesting is she's trying to rewrite history. She's using food in a way to change history and identity. So she's created this fictional African-American woman that lived in Paris in 1920. And they're trying to incorporate, literally bring African-American artists, artisans, just population back into the artwork. So they're using it to, she's using it to rewrite history. And this particular woman that she chose in here, this is supposed to be Josephine Baker, who was a very well-known artist and performer in Paris at the time. But it's very creative. It's significant too. So while we're in America, I just want to point out that there's a very stellar food tradition coming out of Philadelphia. It's a still life tradition. It's the Peale family, and it's several generations. This is one. This was like the first still life painter of food. And he was, Raphael Peale was a taxidermist. And so he painted this, he, kind of slash it open like he would an animal, and you see the insides. There's nothing refined about the way he treated this. And it's optimistic, but it's about death at the same time, with the seeds falling out. And it's it's very fleshy. It's just a different view. But the next time you're in Philadelphia, keep an eye out for this whole line of Peels. This is a painting that I just saw at the Hudson River Museum. I'm going to give a plug for the Hudson River Museum because they just opened up they built a new wing, and it's really fabulous. You would think that you're in Manhattan, and they have had a series of very fine shows there. And this one, I went around looking very closely. I thought, are there any insects in here? Is there any rotted food? I was very, very, very curious. The only thing that I saw, again, were the seeds here. The seeds are not in the watermelon. They're kind of falling out. And wouldn't you know, you have a peeled lemon, the status symbol and the passage of time. So even though this is not a Vanitas painting, it's still borrowing the symbols, and the food means something. It's a very impressive painting. So at the beginning of the 20th century, you had a whole group of photographers that were taking food pictures. This had never quite been done before. You have Edward Weston, and he did, well, this is pepper number 30, so there was at least 30 in the series, but there was a lot more than 30. And he doesn't think there's anything sexual about these peppers. I would call them sensual, because of the texture. But it's like you bring to artwork your own sensibility. You can see what you want in it. But I'm just telling you what he saw. And they're marvelous images. And this one was at the new Bruce wing at the Bruce Museum in Greenwich, which is another place I would highly recommend. It surprised me to no end what a great museum that is now turned into. And again, a completely modern addition. And this is one of my favorite contemporary artists. My heart is with realism. Obviously, I'm not an abstract painter. And I call him TJ. And he paints, he's a contemporary Dutch artist. And he's just magnificent. I don't know what to say about him. But you see little signs in here. So he has crumbs, and he has lettuce that's curling that looks like it's not going to make it, and ketchup and cheese oozing out of it. He's so talented. And he's a modern guy in the tradition of, in the hyper-realist tradition, but looking back at Dutch art, which he is immersed in because he's living in that area. But it's food, glorious food to the max. And he became famous for these egg paintings. And this is a fairly big egg, 30 by 40 inches. And, you see his work around, and I was proud to say that I was in a gallery that showed his work too. So I also painted an egg, more than one. And my story about this is that I was cooking breakfast every day. About the third day, I realized, my God, I have double yolk eggs again. I'm very lucky. And I decided to start photographing them, and I made paintings out of them. And this one, I'm not a hyper realist, so I'm trying to show the paint. I want you to know that there's paint on here, because I kind of feel that maybe I would take a photograph or use Photoshop to get, a hyper real image. So I'm more about the paint. Now, I did another egg, a set of eggs, and I'll show this to people. And men, do you have any thoughts about this? I mean, 9 times out of 10, they'll say, these look like breasts, you know. And, it's not just what the artist intends, it's how we experience them. And you can see these eggs over on the wall. This is a little different. This is plastic food that simulates eggs out of Japan. There's a whole industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry of creating food that is used in windows of stores. They don't have menus per se. They just have this plastic food. And I was just amazed at how real this egg was, even more real than TJ's. And it created a new awareness in me of just looking at the presentation of food. And I went around looking for images of sushi, but what surprised me, of course you find images of sushi, but look at that spaghetti, it's made out of plastic so they can tilt the plates and not worry about it falling down. It makes me very hungry and I want to eat. But it's an art, it's for commercial purposes, but it's very artful. And here's my avocados. So the story behind the avocados is I was at Japan House one day in the city, and I decided I was going to go around to Japanese restaurants and I was going to take pictures of sushi, and I was hoping to see plastic food. But instead, I ended up at the salad bar looking at these avocados, which were displayed as much for just to be ready to serve the lunch crowd as it was for beauty. But it was I ended up painting the avocados instead of the sushi. But it made me again, think about displays, and you think about all the salad bars that you go to, or you think about vending, other channels. So I'm a marketer too, and of course you think about how food is sold. It's sold in grocery stores, it's sold through vending machines, restaurants, and I started playing around with unexpected combinations. When I took the photo, there was an empty slot in there, and I decided to stick a piece of broccoli in there. There was a lot of broccoli talk because the presidents always made jokes about broccoli, and it stuck around for years. And I thought, okay, let's try the broccoli. And I called it superfoods because they're both, one's superfoods in a healthy way and one's in a very decadent way. Oh, and I should mention, I worked, my first job out of business school was at an advertising agency working on an M&M Mars product called Twix. And so these paintings are they're autobiographical too, because that lower row, except for the Milano, was like, they were all the competitors, which I used to analyze every month when the Nielsen reports came out. But I was immersed in these brands, especially Kit Kat and Reese's. The top was, they're all Frito-Lay brands, and they were owned by Pepsi. And my former spouse worked at Pepsi, so we had an attachment to those too. But in reality, I had to stop eating this because the doctor ordered me to eat gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free. So what was left? Vegetables. So this is very autobiographical for me. I mean, this is almost a painting about my own identity. And I was playing around because I wanted people to think about their food choices. I know I had to, but I just wondered what I could do with this. So I made the vegetables bigger and priced them lower. to see what would happen. So during my I do an open studio once a year, and as part of the Rivertown studio tour. So one day this little kid came in and he was looking at the painting, and I said, "Well, what is it that you would buy?" And he'd say, "I want the broccoli." And I was shocked. And I didn't know whether he was saying it because it's in the center of the painting, because it was well painted, or he thought that that's what I wanted him to say, or maybe his mother was listening, standing over in the next room. But I think that, this was me trying to infuse more of a message into my painting. And I think that, I'll do this more in the future. I think, we need to think about food in a different way. That doesn't mean my heart isn't with all the gooey cakes and candies and everything, because it really is. The other thing, in grocery stores, you started to see these stores like Stu Leonard's. Stu Leonard's presents things beautifully. This is just a little tray. I had tried painting it years before and moved, and it went into storage. And I took it out. I felt, okay, I can really paint this broccoli. I can do this, and I can make it look good. I wanted to make it lush and interesting as a piece of candy or a cake. I was very happy with how it came out. But this is more of what you normally see. I call this falling blueberries. It's a cheesecake, and it's one of many cheesecakes that were from Cafe Lalo. I don't know if anybody has been there in the city, but we went there after a Thanksgiving Day parade, and they had like cases of and rows of all different kinds of desserts, which I photographed and painted. And this was one of them. This was my favorite dessert out of all of them. And this I try and imply action, the act of eating. And I try not to make them static. But the implication here is there's people eating it, and there's a story about that. Maybe you're coming together after dinner to just celebrate. So that brings us now, I'm going to just spend a few minutes talking about art not on easel, not on canvases, okay, not portable necessarily, but art done with different media. And it starts to take you back, you go 17,000 years to the caves of Lascaux. Now, there are people that argue that this was not food. These were spiritual art symbols. And that could be, but it could be that they're drawing these pictures because this is what they want to hunt the next day. They're hoping that they won't starve because it's wintertime. You do see pictures in the caves of someone with a bow and arrow shooting animals, but there's there's like hundreds of these things, and they're in caves all over the place. So I believe that I think about it in terms of food and spirituality. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think artists through time, whether it's Rembrandt, Chaim Soutine, Francis Bacon, they all did these kinds of paintings with carcasses. And we saw it right at the beginning with the Dutch still life there. We saw the dead deer and the boar. So is this that different? In Egypt, they covered the walls of tombs with these kinds of carvings, and they presented food for the afterlife. They had such a strong cultural belief that you went and there was an afterlife, that they had to feed everybody. They wanted you to survive. And so you have, and in this case, you have vegetables, fruits, and legumes, and meat was just being introduced. So you see more fish than meat at this point. And this is at the Metropolitan Museum if you want to go see it. And note too that at Egyptian time, it was very beautifully painted. These are bright colors. Today, we don't really see that because it's all faded, but the vegetables were really intense. This is one of my favorite Roman wall paintings. It's unexpected. It's very free as opposed to the Egyptian work that we just saw. One can make an argument when you look at the history of Impressionism that it goes back to this type of thing. It's a fresco painting. It's loose. It's just lovely. And So at this point, it's about 2,000 years old. But you see fruit. It's just, I don't know. It just always surprises me when I see it. I included this slide because over to the left here, do you see this little circle? It's like flatbread. So this is 2,000 years old, and it may be the first pizza. They discovered it in Pompeii in 2023. And there was this big discussion whether this is really pizza or not, because at that point you didn't have tomato sauce, you didn't have mozzarella, but you had vegetables and you had pomegranates or dates and other fruits. And I looked at this and I said, but hey, that's what I'm eating. I can't have the cheese. This is a pizza. To me, it's a pizza. So, but it's fascinating because food hasn't changed that much. You think it has, but it's really the same in a lot of ways. You also have food. We're in the 12th century now. You have food as sacrifice. Surprisingly, it was harder to find images of this than I thought. Like, I have them in my head of Assyrian and all the Far Eastern countries, and yet they wouldn't come up. They're not coded on the internet, but they are for the Bible. So you have the story of Cain and Abel. Abel was a shepherd, and both brothers had to pledge something from their livelihood on the altar, and he was a shepherd, and he pledged a lamb. And then Cain was a farmer, and he pledged the wheat. And God only accepted the lamb and not the wheat. And then Cain got really angry and killed his brother afterwards. So it was like a sacrifice gone bad. But this image is widely reproduced everywhere. But it's, again, food as sacrifice. We'll see that a little later. Here's just the harvesting of food. You had Dutch miniature artists who now went to France to paint illuminated manuscripts in this Gothic style. And what was very striking is these women are harvesting the food, but they look too dainty to even harvest anything, right? It doesn't look like they really were doing serious work. And there's a castle in the background. But it's a beautiful illuminated manuscript, and there's a lot of food in this. So I came across an interesting article about medieval food. This looks like a very refined presentation with this bird, like a peacock-like bird here, and white tablecloths, and everybody's all dressed up. And admittedly, you're looking at wealthy people. It doesn't at all fit the medieval conception we have of everybody having food fights in castles and, with movies that we watch. But the author of the article made a case that in medieval times, people spent a lot of time preparing food and were very elegant about it and very thoughtful. And there's a lot of recipes. And that's true. But that doesn't mean that the people in poverty did this, but it means that my preconception of what medieval food was like changed after this. The most famous fruit of all, the apple in the Garden of Eden, the temptation of Adam and Eve. This apple tree and the apple, I think it's one of the most widely reproduced images everywhere. And it's in almost every church. It's in stained glass. It's in stone, portals, capitals. It tells the story. And it didn't have necessarily a happy ending because they got expelled from the Garden of Eden. But it's powerful. So it's food as symbols. So I tried my hand at this. Now, you can look at this and say, okay, Beverly, it was Halloween. There were candied apples around. You bought one, took a bite, and you painted it. I mean, that's one way to look at it. And the other way is to remember that I'm an art historian and I know the whole history of art. And I just told you about the temptation of Adam and Eve, and that it really has this heavy-duty meaning. And the answer is that it's both, okay? It's both my Halloween candied apple, and it's the history of art combined. So I called it Tempting Candied Apple in a nod to all that biblical history and the symbolism. And to me, I can't see one without the other. I look at it and I say, yes, the Garden of Eden. Even though there's no trees or anything around, that's what I see. So here's food is celebration. So you have a wedding, and the bride is underneath that green cloth there, and it's food. They're serving food. This is kind of maybe what you thought you'd find more of in medieval depictions in those illuminated manuscripts, but you find it more in Flemish painting. And of course, the most famous supper of all, Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. I've often wondered, though, since this was supposed to be the Passover Seder, why they didn't have like flatbread or matzah on the table. Why is this bread? But I'm not here to solve the mysteries of that. But what happens during this Last Supper is Christ says, here is the bread, this is my body, and here is the wine, this is my blood, and this is the sacrament. And this is the founding moment of the Eucharist, which plays such a big role in Catholicism. And this image has been riffed on. Like I could do a whole lecture on just Last Suppers, and it would be fascinating. It's a this is after the Restoration. So when I saw the Last Supper in Italy, it was literally the paint was peeling off the walls because he used tempera, like oil and water does not mix, but he decided to do that anyway. So this is a secular supper by Van Gogh. And we're lucky because Van Gogh left a lot of letters. So he tells us what his intention is. He says he wanted to show that the people have tilled the earth themselves with the hands that they are putting in the dish, that they have honestly earned their food. And he chose the color, something like the color of a really dusty potato, unpeeled, of course. In a way, you could argue that this is a food insecurity painting because the people only had potatoes to eat. They didn't have vegetables, they didn't have meat, they didn't have anything else. But anyway, so that's, secular, different take on dinner. This is a different take on lunch, very famous painting. We can talk about why this woman is nude. Manet was trying to shock, and he certainly did. So food is an excuse for this painting. It's The Luncheon on the Grass by Manet. And it's just, it's an enigmatic painting in some ways, but again, it's centered around food. It also gives me the opportunity to talk about Seward Johnson. How many of you know who Seward Johnson is? Okay, so if this is Seward Johnson's work. It's a takeoff of Luncheon on the Grass. And you see, though, in his takeoff, what happens is the fruit in the basket becomes much more prominent. So Seward Johnson is an heir to the Johnson & Johnson fortune. And so he had the money to be able to hire a metal shop and a forge to actually make all of this. The average person wouldn't be able to do it. And he made all these images, and he founded the Grounds for Sculpture in Hamilton, New Jersey. It's only 2 hours away, and if you go, can you give me a ride? I would like to come. And I used to think, well, maybe this is an art. There's a whole big thing now about AI and art and copyright. And, here he is, he's taking somebody else's idea. But I have to say that after going and actually walking around and seeing like a passage like this and experience what it's like to be living in this painting, that in fact, I think it is art. It's not just copying. He's bringing his own sensibility to it. So another big one that he did that's out there, it's a riff on this painting by Renoir, which is the luncheon and the boating party. And it's really a celebratory lunch on a beautiful day. And there's a lot of food there you can see on the table. And this is what Seward Johnson did. And you see I'm there walking through the sculpture. They, unlike most places, they let you walk, they let you touch, they let you experience. And it's very cool. And here's the food. which got, very primary placement. Here's another very famous dinner party. Have you been? It's over at the Brooklyn Museum. So yeah, you've seen it. It's the dinner party by Judy Chicago. And it's argued that this is the first major feminist artwork, and it's a symbol of 39 iconic women in art history and the world and civilization. And so you have 39 place settings going around this big triangle, and then you have hundreds of names etched in the beginning. You can see it in the middle, excuse me, and you can see it at the beginning of this triangle here. She had a retrospective a year ago at the new museum, and I went down for that. And it was actually an amazing thing because she is the ultimate feminist, but you never heard about her. She was a minimalist. She'd be in a show, but everybody wrote about the men and never about the women. So she decided to do her own representation of dinner. And then she would choose major women who made contributions in some way to the arts or to the world. And here you see Virginia Woolf, and it looks like she's eating some kind of a salad. And then you see Emily Dickinson, and you look at this and you say, it's a more delicate sensibility, but what are we looking at? And we're really looking at vulvas. We're looking at female genitalia. That's what she's serving. It's just such a revolutionary way of thinking. In that art show at the new museum had all the sketches there, and you could, once they were up, it was really clear what she was doing. It was very sexual. Now there was one of Queen Elizabeth, but I felt it was inappropriate to show. I even had a picture of it because I don't think she would like that. I could see her turning in her grave. But pardon? If you came to my house, though, you'd get a real birthday cake. This is hanging out in the front hall. You can't see it, but I use the paint to build up the texture. The crumbs are three-dimensional, and my cakes are kind of messy. I don't do necessarily neat cakes. And they got messier as I painted them longer. They're more fun. And this is oil on linen. I started to paint with linen because the oil painting kind of glides on like butter. That's how I would describe it. And this is like art is like a collaborative effort. So my daughter Bonnie, who's here and brought the food, she made her own trifle for her epic birthday party dinner. She's the only person I know who cooks her own dinner on her birthday. And she'll cook for 20 people. So she made this, she made a trifle, and it was half filled, and it was caramel and white frosting, and it was a great, white cream rather. It was a great presentation. And after it was over, I said, Bonnie, can you make me something with color, with chocolate? And I didn't tell her to fill it up the first time, so she had to make it a second time and fill it up that time. 20 people could have eaten it. It's a really big container. But it's something that I'm proud of, and it was an honor to work with you, Bonnie. So this is a barbecue painting. It's actually on display now at the Harlem Renaissance at the Metropolitan Museum as part of that show. And if I remember correctly, it was a barbecue on the occasion of a birthday. I want to go from Harlem back to Japan and other Far Eastern countries and acknowledge the fact that I'm a Western female artist. We're here in New York, and we only see, our lens is Western art for the most part. We're not looking at what's going on in the Far East, but like there's 500 million people in the rest of the world, and we need to acknowledge what's going on. So you see here, there's sushi. It was done in the 18th century, like a woodblock print, started in Japan. And then you see one of the most iconic presentations of tea and food and ceremony. You see that in the tea, in the tea ceremony in Japan. And that tea ceremony is a lot more prevalent than you would think. And there's images, this is from the Metropolitan Museum. It has it's very formal. It has stages. I remember going to a tea ceremony at Japan House in the city, and it was very moving. It's also represented in Chinese painting. Um, and here, at first, I thought this was a tea ceremony. So this is Buddha eating with the monks. He isn't having tea. And it's coming out of India. And this is 4th century, 1st to 4th century. And if you're looking for food and you're looking for tea, you will see it all over, but it's not reproduced much on the internet or in history books or in art history books. You just don't see it. You have to kind of look. So I wanted to spend a moment talking about photojournalism and the role that it's playing now in food insecurity around the world. You know, we're looking at these images, right? Everyone comes in and they'll say, oh, your work is so happy and all that. And then I feel a tad guilty because I'm not talking about anything else that's about what's going on in the world. But these photojournalists are. And it's, you know, we all know we have food insecurity on a global basis, but these guys are portraying it. I thought it was really interesting what this photographer did on the upper left, because he doesn't show food, he shows the absence of food. It shows these empty tin pans, and it was very poignant. And on the lower right, you see people fighting over bread in Ukraine. You know, the breadbasket of the world can barely feed itself right now. In the upper right-hand corner, you see all these food trucks that somehow don't get to the people that need it. And you see the United States on the lower left trying to do these food drops on a Gazan beach. And, you know, I'm showing you these images because I think it's going to revolutionize, you know, art in the long run. And I think we're going to see a lot more shows that include this is going to trigger, and it already is, different kind of view of food and art, creation of art around the world. You start to see food insecurity shows at places like crafts museums, smaller museums. We're not yet seeing it at larger museums, but it will come. So you also have to look at food insecurity in the United States. There's plenty of it. As a matter of fact, I was looking online today at Patch, you know, patch.com, and it was talking about how 11% of the people in the United States are experiencing food insecurity, including in Westchester County. So this professor at Northeastern University, with his wife, did some research during the pandemic and found out that every day in Massachusetts, 1,659 new households applied for SNAP, which is the nutritional assistance program. And so they put a display together. This is a sculpture installed on the campus on Northeastern, and it has 1,659 utensils in it to represent the families that aren't able to get the food that they need. And it hasn't changed. We thought, well, this is just a pandemic thing, but it's not. So I donate to Feeding Westchester. One day I'll have a collaborative show with them and we'll donate the proceeds. But in the meantime, this is my public service announcement, and I will now, this is the end of my public service announcement, because what happened when I looked at this, it reminded me of the biggest utensil I had ever seen outside the Walker Museum in Minneapolis, and it has a cherry on it. It's made by Klaus Oldenburg. And what is he trying to do? He's using scale to jolt us to think about things differently. And a lot of artists do that. And he does it with these soft sculptures. You've probably seen it, that MoMA would display them. Giant piece of cake. And it's very humorous. It made me think of Conran's. Did anybody used to shop at that store? It used to have giant pieces of everything. I thought, well, if I had a bigger house, I would get that giant piece of cake or whatever they had. This is Jeff Koons. You know, he uses a lot of mylar. He's famous for his rabbits out of mylar, very reflective, very clean, very sophisticated. This is Bonnie. We were at a show many years ago at the Whitney, and you look at his cake, it was giant. It blew me away. But you look at it and you see there's not a crumb in sight, you know. It's a very pristine view of the world. unlike mine. Okay. The more crumbs, the better. The more the merrier. That's my philosophy. So this was actually one of 5 paintings that I did in various stages of being eaten. And I went back in, and it's out in the front hallway too. And you can see I really built up the texture of the crumbs over and over again. Like you can't see it. It's flattened, especially when it's blown up. But this is hunks of oil paint. And I don't use medium. I just use the paint. So this was my attempt at scale. I took this little Oreo and I blew it up for 2 by 3 feet, also out in the front hall, and spent a lot of time building up the paint surface of it. And I named it Cosmic Oreo because to me it looked like a comet that was moving through space with pieces breaking off of it. And that was my bite too. And this is a detail for people on Zoom that can't see the real thing, but you start to see the texture in this image. So I'll get museums and organizations will contact me and they'll say, well, would you lend some drawings or paintings to our exhibition? And someone contacted me and they said, can we have 6 Oreo drawings, put them in an envelope and just send them and we'll frame them. And I thought, okay, well, why not? I'll do this. But you always wonder where they go, right? Like, what do they do? What does the installation look like? Did they really put it up? And I had a friend in California that was actually went to the show and took the picture. It was called Off Menu. So the Oreos being off menu, contemporary food about art. And you see an artist on the right using this big citrus fruit, but you see my little Oreos, here they are. So they were really in the show. And this is what they look like. So my story about these Oreo drawings probably isn't what you would think it would be, but I actually did them while I was watching March Madness, okay? I am a March Madness addict, and I watch all the play-in games. But you're spending days doing this, and a lot of the games are blowout games, and I'm sitting there saying, oh my God, they're so boring, and I'm wasting all this time. And I pulled out Bristol board and some pencils, and I started sketching Oreos that people bit during my open studio. So like this is Maisie's Oreo right here. And Maisie was a little kid when she bit this Oreo. She's getting ready to go to college now. So, it's my story, but it's also the story of the people biting the Oreos. They're real people. Upper left is Carol. And a lot of people didn't leave their names, but I'll remember some of the faces and I'll remember the discussions. Some people stack their Oreos. Some people do all kinds of things. And this led to a print that I call Oreo Mandela. It's actually right there on that wall. And I call it Mandela. I was getting immersed in cultural experience and had gone to a Mandela workshop in the Rubin Museum. And I just thought, okay, we'll have the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. And we'll see, maybe someone will meditate on this, although it's very challenging to meditate on Oreos, right? So when I was doing this, though, I was very aware of Warhol, of the repetition of images. My images were repeated, but they were varied. His are the same, except for the name of the soups. And what I learned from this, I forgot these were hand painted. So this was his view on our culture. It's a statement about, people refer to it as pop art. And it's a statement about our culture, about consumerism. There's so much available. We go into the market and we have so many choices. What are we going to do with all these choices? Sometimes I wonder. And it's about abundance. It's the opposite of food insecurity. And he did a riff on his own can and ripped the label. And I really related to that because my first job in advertising is I was sent to a photography studio and I ripped open candy bars and broke them for a shoot, a commercial television shoot. And I always thought about these ripped packages, and so I started painting them. This was one of the competitors. I just liked the shape of it. And you notice though, I can't bring myself to rip through the middle of the logo because I know how much money these brands spent developing them. And it bothers me, so I kind of rip around them. But this was like part of a candy series. And I did another one. I did an M&M's candy up there. And these are my stories, okay? I have a website, and I write blogs and stories, and each one of these has a blog post on it. Like I would do a painting a day. It was a 30-day challenge, and I joined it. And I would paint the whole day, and then I had the energy to write a blog about it, which is just amazing to me. Um, and then, but I was aware of the packaging. The donuts come in boxes. We're back to the vending machines and the crust cupcakes. I did a lot of those with the logo on it. These were cookies from Riviera. And I would use these little panel paintings to do small paintings to see whether I wanted to do the larger paintings. So these were the forerunners of these eggs over there. But again, these are my stories. Each one has a story. So now we're at Wayne Thiebaud, who has repeating images, okay? Not unlike Andy Warhol. People say he's pop, but he's really not, in my opinion. And he didn't think he was a pop artist. He wanted to just paint everyday life and nostalgia. And that's the camp I'm in. So he and I were looking at similar things. But my challenge as an artist was to create something that, I'm looking at the same subject as Wayne Thiebaud, but make it look like Beverly Shipko. And this is what I came up with, which is hanging on the wall over there. And it's clearly not Wayne Thiebaud. And I'm very proud of it. I took photos. I was in Grand Central Station, and they had a pastry shop there. And I just took photos, and I came home and I said, this is it. I didn't put their logos on all those chocolates. No, I'm not that commercial. So we're back at Wayne Thiebaud, and you can see I love Wayne Thiebaud. He lived to 101. He died 2 years ago. I think he's one of the greatest painters America ever came up with. And what I like about his work is he revels in the paint, kind of like Van Gogh did. And some of my early paintings do that. So I was trying not to look like Wayne Thiebaud, but this other woman by the name of Sharon Core was trying to look like Wayne Thiebaud. So what did she do? She took photographs of Thiebaud out of books. She baked her own cakes that looked like Wayne Thiebaud. She used to be a set designer, so she would construct these cake trays and the metal stand. And then her output was a C-print, a photograph. And, she became famous that way. So, you would think there's copyright issues or you couldn't do this. And, Wayne Thiebaud wasn't very happy about it, but he never did anything about it. And here's a side-by-side comparison. So one of the things about the internet is I would say at least half the time I will see this image and it'll say Wayne Thiebaud on it. And the way you know that it's not Wayne Thiebaud is you look at this. This one is dominant. It's just totally dominant. Yeah, it's this. It just stands out. It jumps out in a way. What were you saying? Um, yeah, yeah. Well, yes, because she probably traced it or did something. But it's also just dominant. It just, you look at it and your eye goes to that swirl the first thing. Whereas you look at Thiebaud's and it kind of integrates in. Yeah, you went. Yes, yes. Well, yeah, and she probably took a lot of different photos from different angles, and this is what she came up with. But it's close enough that everybody thinks it's Thiebaud. Like I was actually on an art presentation with an art historian. She puts it up and she says it's Wayne Thiebaud. And afterwards, I emailed her. I said, I don't think so. Um, here's another artist baking cakes. It's Cake Boss, Buddy Valastro. Do you ever watch his shows? Um, that's you also have the rise of celebrity chefs, specialized cakes. Riviera makes them. Other bakers around here bake it. So you have a dinner basically. That spaghetti reminds me of the Japanese plastic food. You can't really tell that much of a difference. But here he is. It's another form of food art, and we have to acknowledge it, even though it's not a fine art. And then you see food in fashion. You think of McDonald's fries, maybe that's a Nathan's hot dog. There was a show at the Fashion Institute of Technology, and this was what they had on their website as their featured image. Now, this might look familiar to Rana. We saw it at the Taylor Swift video presentation at the Museum of Art and Design. So it's Katy Perry on the left, Taylor Swift on the right, dressed as a Happy Meal. And the Museum of Art and Design had this video show. It was an hour of video of Taylor Swift. It was actually mesmerizing because I never knew she did all that. But here she had a food segment. And, she's wearing McDonald's fries, basically. And you know that it's McDonald's fries, even though it doesn't have the logo on it. But that's how iconic some of these packaging and brand images are. You don't even need the words. And Katy Perry went on to make a series of videos too, Teenage Dreams and California Girls, and it was all about candy and Candyland and cotton candy, and she was dressed in all kinds of things. Now here's, so Taylor Swift in her video took things out of context. Here's Salvador Dali taking this lobster out of context. This is not the same, it does not have the same meaning as that first lobster in that very first painting. Salvador Dali thinks lobsters have sexual connotations. And I'm not even going to analyze that. I'm not even going to touch it except to know that it is. And it grabs your attention. And he did a lot of these in museums around the world. He says, I do not understand why when I ask for a grilled lobster in a restaurant, I am never served a cooked telephone. Well, I don't understand either. I don't understand why he's writing. I'm just showing you things. I related more to this image. This is in MoMA. And one of the valuable things about doing a talk like this is you learn new things. Like I must have walked by this sculpture 100 times and didn't pay any attention to it. But I knew I was doing this talk and I say, oh my God, there's bread on her head, and she's got corn going down. And that was Salvador Dali taking things out of context. And the food, it's emulsified in some kind of plastic. And those are ants on her face. And there's a consumption message in here that I don't totally understand. But MoMA writes, the woman is to be consumed, ants on her forehead as if gathering crumbs. So it's another way to look at food. And this artist takes it even further, okay? He uses food instead of paint. So it's a nod to Andy Warhol's multiple images of the Mona Lisa, and he's got jelly on the left and peanut butter on the right, literally. And I don't know how he kept that from getting spoiled. I think it has to be replenished. And this was something I wish I had seen. Kara Walker, yeah, it's the old Domino sugar factory that was being demolished in Brooklyn. And Kara Walker is an African-American artist that usually does dark silhouettes of, images of the South or lives of Black people. And she did this, and it was kind of an irony because it's almost like Aunt Jemima, but in white sugar. She did a foam base and covered it in white sugar, and she called it a subtlety or the marvelous sugar baby, an homage to the unpaid and overworked artists who have refined our sweet tastes from the cane fields. So this is like really fraught with meaning, and it was on the New York Times article about the most iconic art images that have redefined contemporary art, and this certainly did it. This is one of my photos. It's a photo of my vegetable ikebana. I take ikebana, with a friend of mine who's here. And we go every week. It's on Zoom. It started during the pandemic. And every once in a while, we do vegetable arrangements instead of branches and flowers and trees. And it's very liberating. And it got me thinking, you know, it reminds me a little bit of the Edward Weston concept of just photographing food. And it's fun. And I've learned to think about using food differently in flower arrangements and in my own art. This also uses food, real honeybees. See this? These are hives, honeybee hives. And the artist was making an environmental statement. This was an exhibit in the Museum of the city of New York. And it was someone who's concerned, they call it twilight, and they're concerned we're not going to have bees and insects to pollinate the foods. So what does that mean? So they have some of the foods that need pollination, some of the seeds, they have eggs, they have everything in here. And this is more of a detail, and you see here, you see a monarch butterfly up in here, mushroom seeds. You know, the artist is trying to sound the alarm. And this case was mobbed the whole time we were there. All right, this is my last exhibit that I'm going to show you. This was from the New York Botanical Gardens, and it's called Around the Table, Stories of the Food We Love. So it's a nod to the fact that food is really, it facilitates stories. It's part of our memory. And they asked them to just do whatever they wanted to. They just needed to communicate somehow, community, culture, creativity, religion, and somehow tie into the fact that they're at a garden. So you have picnic tables, which we saw back in Dutch still life, you know, all the way back there, picnic tables, food, markets. And this was a woman who decided to go back and present her ancestral dish, which is paella. She went back to Valencia, she went back to her root. And that's what she shows us. And she shows us the history, the recipes, and the ingredients. This is a rather enigmatic piece, but really wonderful. And what it is, it's loosely representing a traditional Passover Seder to honor her Jewish and Dominican heritage. So in a way, it harks back to the Last Supper. I mean, Da Vinci does his own presentation of it, and this is hers. And, you know, you see these three figures in what is supposed to be a Passover Seder plate. And what happens is these are actually ancestors. She's made up mythical ancestors, and that person is, it's almost like a sacrificial offering of a head. This woman has a fish. This has water for purification. And in her own words on a video, she says that each of these ancestors touches on a different stage of life, a different stage of grieving, offering a unique perspective to connect. And she invites us to say, well, what do you think they're gathering for? You know, how do you gather? She wants us to project ourselves into this. And here's a Seder plate like none other. There's a head in the middle, a wooden head. This is a nod a little bit to the egg that's on the Seder plate, but I've never seen a whole fish on it. And this is almost a peace symbol. So it's very fascinating, and I would like to hear more about it. I'd like to hear her talk about it more. But she doesn't get into specifics. And this one is just fun. Okay, it's called tossed salad. It's beautiful. It's interesting because it's tossed on the table. Usually we toss salads in bowls. So this is on the table, and it was made out of, it's crocheted, for those people who know anyone that's knitting here. It's crocheted with paracord so that it can stand up in the elements. And here's a detail. You know that these are strawberries and blueberries, and you see the citrus fruit. It's just fun, and it was used as the frontispiece, as the advertisement on the New York Botanical materials and website. And this is the last piece that I'm going to show you today. I have 3 slides of it. um, we went around looking for all these tables, and we came across it, and the first thing I remember seeing are these teacups. So it reminds me of those Dutch paintings with the silver things sideways and everything tilting. And here you see teacups tilting, and you see dirt on the plates. The food is long gone. It's disintegrated. You're in dirt. You have rocks. You have succulents coming through. When I wanted to use this image because it spoke to me, and I didn't know who did it, and I didn't know what she intended. So I had a lot of time to just look at it. And I looked, and you have porcelain, you have pottery, you have different plants. And, I asked you, well, what story does it make you think about? What does this make you think about? I looked at it and I said, okay, it looks like an archaeological dig. It looks like Pompeii, like what Pompeii would have looked like as people ran and the lava went through, or maybe a tornado or a hurricane or even a terrorist attack. Um, you just like pick up and run. So it was like a tea ceremony or tea party or dinner party gone bad. So the artist herself she describes herself kind of as an environmentalist. And she says that this is about the passage of time and the triumph of nature over man. And no doubt it is, a lot of her work looks like that. But to me, I get a lot more out of it. I go back and I say, hey, this is like a reinterpretation of a Vanitas panel painting. Only now it's installation art. It's almost like performance art. And the way you get the passing of time is the elements in it actually disintegrate from the elements of the weather. And it's just, I don't know, it's again, a passing of time goes back to the Vanitas paintings, but then I look at it and I say, well, okay, if you look through it, the lens of memento mori, like some that with the skulls and Cezanne did, you can throw a skull in here and you'll even talk more, you'll have more death imagery. But I don't want to leave you there. I want you to look at the growth at the top. Because what that says to me, it gives me a sense of renewal, of hope, that even though this is a tea party gone bad, that there's going to be more in the future, and that we're going to all get together, have some kind of hope and renewal, and celebrate with dinner. Okay, so that is it. That is my bite-sized view. Thank you. If you want to reach out and you have ideas or photographs, I'm always looking for food photographs. Take a picture of this slide and then you'll have my contact information. That shows up through May 22nd if you want to come back. And yes, questions, comments?